All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled How to Fail at Cloud Transformation. My name is Hillary, and I will be your MC for this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining the conversation. Before we get started, let's cover some of the webinar functionalities first. So during the webinar, everyone's microphones will be muted, but we want this to be an open discussion. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box or chat window at the bottom of your screen. There will also be a dedicated Q&A session after the presentation, so please stay tuned for that. Joining us as a panelist, we have a very own Ken Kruger. Ken is a certified instructor at ExitCertified and has over 30 years of experience as a software developer, project leader, project manager, scrum master, and instructor spanning the mainframe, client server, web, and cloud eras. With this said, Ken, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Hillary. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Kruger. I'll be leading this session on how to fail at cloud transformation. So Hillary has already given you a basic bio, but just to add to it, I am a senior instructor. I spend most of my time teaching cloud topics nowadays, mostly, well, exclusively AWS, but I'm familiar with the other clouds as well. When I'm not teaching Amazon Web Services, I still teach some Java, Spring Framework, and I'm doing some Kubernetes training as well. And I've been in this business for about 30 years. What I wanted to do today is I wanted to put together a little presentation on how a lot of people fail at cloud transformation. And of course, the reason you're attending is, of course, not so you can fail, but so that you can not fail. So there's actually quite a few articles on this subject. If you want, you can just quickly open a browser and do a quick Google search, and you'll see a number of people who will have articles that you can read on this topic. So what I'm presenting you isn't new, but what I wanted to do is something a little bit unique. You see, because at ExitCertified as an instructor, I have a lot of different students. We all do. I noticed some other instructors from ExitCertified are on the call. Ken, I saw you joining there. So anyway, one of the things that we like to do at ExitCertified is we try to make our training events as interactive as possible. And so we like to encourage our students to talk and tell us about what they're doing. And sometimes folks really tell us some really interesting stories. And so over time, I meet about 500 students a year in this job. And over time, I've noticed certain patterns that organizations fall into. And the students who come into classes, they're kind of suffering because of it. And a lot of times they'll hear some of the things that we're teaching and they say, yeah, we can't do this because our organization is doing X. And so I thought about this and I just tried to put together a presentation kind of outlining some of the common patterns and ways that people actually grasp failure from the jaws of victory, as it were. Now, I'm going to tell you some stories, but I'm not going to tell you any names or individuals or companies, and I'm not going to give you enough facts when I do this to even give you enough information to guess. But everything I'm going to tell you is basically based on stories or information that I've gotten from students over the years. And by the way, as you listen to this, you might have a story of your own that you would like me to know about. So jot this email down really quick and send me an email. My email is ken.kruger, that's KRUEGER, @techdata.com. Now, before I get into the actual reasons that folks fail at cloud transformation, I want to give you an overall motivation here. And this motivational statement I'm about to give you actually comes from an AWS document called the Cloud Adoption Framework. And it's a document that AWS put together to try to help organizations adopt cloud. The statement is basically that technological transformation enables process transformation, enables organizational transformation, which enables product or service transformation. In other words, the reason we're doing all of this technical work is not just so we have an easier way to do the technical work. What we're trying to do is actually transform our processes so we can transform our organization so that we can actually have something positive to show for it. So we're not doing the technical we're not doing a technical transformation just to achieve technical transformation. Okay, we're trying to actually have a different organization because of it. Okay, that's about transformation. So first of all, the first way that people fail at cloud transformation is this: treating the cloud as a remote data center. Now, to be fair, we don't see this as much as we do, as much as we used to. 5 years ago, when I would ask students what at the beginning of a class what they thought the cloud was, people would routinely say, well, it's just a remote data center. Nowadays, I ask the same question. Most people don't say that. So most people have gotten beyond this. But for a while, people really thought that the cloud was simply a different version of a remote data center, no different than what we've used before. So our applications, our organizational structure, our business processes can remain unchanged. We are essentially going to take what we're doing now, pick it up, lift it, and shift it over into the cloud environment. Now, a couple things about this school of thought here. There's some things that we need to realize, and there's some things that we need to do instead. So first of all, when we talk about cloud computing is not really about where something is done. It's how we are consuming IT resources. In fact, one of the latest trends in cloud that you see in AWS and Microsoft and Google is they're actually pushing hardware into traditional data centers. They're trying to get the processing back into data centers. Okay, but it's still cloud computing because the way we consume resources is different. The cloud consumption model is completely different from what we're used to in on-prem and co-location models. We're not doing long-term leases or purchases and capital expenditures anymore. Now, earlier I used the term lift and shift. There's nothing, listen to me carefully, there's nothing wrong with doing a lift and shift of an application that you're working on right now, picking it up as is and plopping it over into the cloud. But we just need to understand that that limits your value proposition. You're not going to get all of the cool benefits that you've heard about with cloud computing if you're just lifting and shifting. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, so instead, what we need to do is just kind of adapt our mindset to the new model. We have a new consumption model here. And there's nothing wrong with lift and shift. Just use it as the first phase of your journey. About 2 or 3 years ago, this was before COVID, we at ExitCertified, we were doing a number of training courses for a company based on the West Coast. And they were in the middle of moving everything into Amazon Web Services. And I was out there a few times for some training events, and the lead architect for their organization, he came to me in the break and he said, do you mind if I do a little presentation for 10 minutes? Can I interrupt your class for 10 minutes to do this presentation? I just want to tell everyone in your class, what we're doing here and what our plan is. So I said, sure. And so he comes in and I'm sitting in the back of the room, just kind of listening. And it's the most beautiful project plan I've ever heard. And I used to do project management. It's the most beautiful project plan I've ever heard because it was so simple. And he basically was up there and he said, folks, our plan is basically 2 phases. Phase 1, we're going to lift and shift everything that we've got right now into the AWS cloud environment by the end of the year so that we get out of our data center agreement. That's just phase 1. But when we do it, we know that we're not going to be optimal. We know that we're not going to be achieving everything that we could be achieving. And we know that our spend, our total IT spend, was probably going to be more than what we're doing right now, which leads us to phase 2, which is going to be, then we're going to go back and optimize everything. And I thought, this is the most beautiful plan in the world because everyone in the organization, even the janitor, can understand that plan. It's just so simple. And that's exactly what they implemented, and they achieved a lot of success. Okay. All right, so the cloud is not just a remote data center, which brings us to number 2. Enjoy the cost savings. Now, maybe a better title for this would be relax and enjoy the cost savings. So what happens to some organizations is this: there'll be a pilot project. A crack team is basically assembled to migrate one low-risk application into a cloud environment. They are very successful at it. They do a presentation at an all-hands meeting, and they show how much money they saved and they're going to save over time. Everybody claps. They get a plaque from the CEO or CTO, and we decide to keep doing the same thing. But the problem is the subsequent migrations are much more difficult, okay? And a case study of this is a company called Hungama. If you've never heard of Hungama, it simply means that you don't watch a lot of movies produced in India or music videos or things that come out of India. So this is a production company based in somewhere in India. I'm actually not very sure. This case study that I'm about to tell you, you can actually Google this and you can find this on the AWS case study site. Their first projects were very, very successful, but then their following projects saved less and less and less, and their ongoing operations cost more and more and more, until about 3 years into their transition, they found that their AWS bill was easily exceeding their previous IT spend on their previous data center. Not what we're supposed to have, okay? So there's a few things that we need to realize in order to address this one. First, we are in an on-demand utilization environment. And this requires ongoing effort in order to manage it. If you pay for your own electric bill and your own water bill, you are going to manage your consumption differently than if all of this is built into the rent that you pay, let's say. Next, in the cloud environment, we have to understand that resources are disposable. At any time, I can use API calls to acquire all the resources that I need. And when I'm done, I simply throw them out. So everything is disposable. There are also different pricing models. I have long-term pricing plans that I can engage into. I have, in the case of AWS, I have reserved pricing. I have spot pricing that I can engage in. When you hear about the people who are saving 80% off of their AWS bill, they're not taking the on-demand rack price. They're basically utilizing the different pricing models. Now, there's another source of conflict here in the way that a lot of companies do their financial management. For a lot of growth companies, younger companies that need to impress their investors with how much they are growing and how much they are changing, one of the things that the CEO or the CFO wants to do on an earnings call is they want to highlight their ongoing investment in technology and how they're becoming more and more efficient over time. When you go into cloud computing, you actually move in the opposite direction, and your operational expenses start to go up and your capital expenditures start to go down. That doesn't look good to certain investors who are expecting something different. But in the cloud, an increase in OpEx does not indicate inefficiency. In fact, it indicates the opposite. And a decrease in CapEx does not signal a loss of investment, a lack of investment. In fact, it's the opposite. So sometimes we have a conflict between the way that the senior leadership wants the organization to look on the earnings call. All right, so instead, we need to realize that we have to actively monitor and manage the costs. Okay, we're in a new environment now where we have to manage everything that we do. In the case of Hungama, they talked to their AWS technical account manager, and they advised them to use one of the simplest services in all of Amazon Web Services. It's called Trusted Advisor. And all you do is click on the screen. And what it does is the screen just tells you everything that you're doing wrong. And it has all kinds of cost savings on it. So using that, they corrected some over provisioning of EC2 instances. They got rid of old EC2 and EBS environments that they didn't need anymore. This is important here. They came up with a process. I'm going to reprise this theme a little bit later. They came up with a process to automate retirement of old resources. So the problem that they ran into is they would do a project and they'd have a bunch of resources just for the development and testing effort. And then when something was in production, they didn't need that anymore, but they kept it around. They should have thrown it out. So they came up with an automated process to get rid of that. And over time, they got a 90% reduction in the amount of backups that they were taking, and they got their bill under control. So good story there. As far as the OpEx and CapEx is concerned, This is just something that has to be communicated clearly by your CFO when they're on the earnings call. They should say, we're adopting cloud computing. We're trying to get to a world where our OpEx is actually higher because we're trying to track our expenses very, very closely with our revenues. So those are our first 2 points here out of the 9 that I'm going to cover. I want to pause for just a moment. Are there any questions and comments on these first 2? Hillary, did you see anything in the chat?
No, so far, no questions or comments.
Okay. So folks, as I go through these, I'm going to pause every 2 points as I go through. And so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. Hillary will make sure that I get them relayed to me. All right. The first 2 were pretty simple. The next 2 are going to be more controversial because almost everybody falls into this trap. So number 3 is managing infrastructure through a central team of some form or fashion. Cloud architecture is tricky. It's best to leave it to the experts. We have a small group of experts, and so we're going to let them set everything up. Most of the teams are supposed to just send the requirements to the central infrastructure team, and then they wait until that overworked central team is able to produce everything and get back to them. Sometimes this is called a managed services organization. Sometimes this is called a cloud excellence team, except that what I am describing now is neither of those. I had some students about 6 months ago. They described this exact situation. They said that they had to wait for their central team to produce the CloudFormation templates. This is an Amazon situation. So CloudFormation templates were used to create everything, but they weren't allowed to create their own. They had to wait until the centralized team created them and then send it to them, and then they could run it. And so they'd wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And when they'd get something, it would have a problem with it, and they'd have to document what the problem was and send it back. So it got to the point that they just decided to create the CloudFormation templates and send it to this overworked central team and say, this is what you want. This is what you want to give us. Could you please give it back? Okay. But it would still take weeks for that overworked central team to get to the point that they could actually respond. All right. So what's the problem with managing your infrastructure through one overworked central team? One of the topics I used to teach a lot was agile software development and Scrum Master training and things like that. Anytime that you have cross-team dependencies, it kills agility. Anytime that a team has to stop and wait, or an individual has to stop and wait for something else or someone else, it kills the agility. We need all of the resources on our team to do what we need to do. Also, anytime you have a manual process, it simply does not scale. That central team only has a certain number of people on it working as fast as they can. They just don't scale. They just don't scale. And infrastructure provisioning can be automated in any of the cloud environments, AWS, Azure, Google, Oracle, Alibaba. They can all, DigitalOcean, everything can be automated by API calls. So instead, what we want to do is we want to shift our thinking. First of all, infrastructure as code can be used as the mechanism by which we build our infrastructure. But a more subtle change is the adoption of a guardrail philosophy versus a roadblock philosophy. This example that I was just telling you about a moment ago, they wanted to achieve a good architectural result. And the mechanism that they used to do it was a roadblock approach. Let's have the one group do everything, and everybody waits for that. We have to wait while we go through the roadblock. A better philosophy is the guardrail approach. The guardrail approach is where the centralized team establishes a safe environment that the development teams can work in without risk that they'll really ever encounter any significant danger. And when you establish a guardrail approach, you're able to actually make the entire organization scale because everybody can work more freely. And a good example of that is the picture of a classic playground like you see right here. What you see here is a safe environment. There's no risk. These kids are not at risk of serious injury because we have prepared a safe environment for them to play. Now, there's a couple of things I want you to notice about this picture. First of all, look over here on the right. See the parents? They're not paying attention to the kids. They're having their own discussion. They are not managing the kids' activities, and the kids are not going to the parents and say, can I go on the slide now? Can I go on the swing set now? They are free to do their own activities in this safe environment, and the parents know that it's safe, so they're relaxed enough to turn their back and not pay attention to what the kids are doing. Okay, but this is a safe environment. Take a look at this little guy right here. This little guy is experimenting with Newton's laws of gravity right now. He is experimenting, he's learning, he's pushing the boundaries. He is representative of a highly motivated development team who wants to try new technologies, who wants to try new things to see if they can do things in a better way. But he's still in a safe environment. If he slips and falls, that green carpet thing is going to keep him from being seriously hurt. Did we see this? Okay. So this is what we want. This is where we want to work. We want to work in a safe environment. Okay. All right. Now, this next one is also going to be a little controversial too. So this is number 4. This is managing security through a central team. This happens very, very frequently. After all, cloud security is very tricky, is best left to the experts. Of course, the experts are overworked, but we still want to leave things to the experts. We want to create nice, consistent security controls, and the only way that we can think of to do that is to have one team set up those rules. Or we might have compliance regulations. We might be under HIPAA or PCI or FedRAMP or who knows what, that it's going to restrict exactly what we can do. And the only way that we can think of enforcing that is having a central team enforce all the security rules. This is sometimes known as a managed services organization. However, what I'm describing here, is not a managed services organization. As an example of this, I had a student about 2 months ago. She was in one of my AWS security classes, and we were talking about this very phenomenon. She raised her hand. She said, yeah, it just took us 4 weeks to set up a webhook to set up one of our DevOps chains. I said, 4 weeks? Why did it take 4 weeks? I said, well, we had to do just what you described here. We had to send the request to the central team, and then we had to wait, and we had to wait, and we had to wait. Now, for those of you who don't know, a webhook doesn't take 4 weeks to set up. It takes 10 minutes to set up. And it didn't take the central team that long. It took the central team 4 weeks to get to this work item so that they could produce it. In the meantime, our development team is sitting there waiting for this to happen. Okay. And of course, why? They were trying to set up a DevOps pipeline here. So they're setting up the DevOps pipeline in order to move more quickly and be more agile, but they have to wait in order to get the thing set up. It's so ironic. Okay. So a couple things to realize here. Cross-team dependencies kill agility. And security, whatever you do with security, it should never rely on a manual process, because manual processes introduce errors and it doesn't scale. Does this sound familiar? Is anybody getting a deja vu at this point? Didn't I just say something like this? Back up just a second here. Yeah, I just said this like 3 slides back. I said cross-team dependencies kill agility, manual processes don't scale. In this case, I was talking about a centralized architecture development team. In this case, I'm talking about a centralized security team. People come up with all kinds of centralized teams and all kinds of roadblocks to try to slow themselves down. Sometimes it's the network team. Sometimes it's the production support team. Sometimes it's the database team. But all of these have the same thing in common. They're all examples of roadblocks, not guardrails. Okay, so we want guardrails, not roadblocks. When it comes to security controls, we all want good security controls. The challenge is how we get there. Do you get there by making everything a roadblock, or can you imagine a nice, safe guardrail environment? Think back to the playground. The playground has a fence around it. A little toddler can't go running out into the road and have an accident because the environment keeps that from happening. So if we can engineer our environment so that doesn't happen, we have achieved the objective without the roadblock, okay? And there are ways that we can do this. One of the things you can do is you can safely delegate permission management. Folks, for the rest of this week, I'm teaching a 3-day Amazon security engineering course. This is one of the things that we talked about one day. And every time I go through this, when students see how you can do this in Amazon, it's like, oh, I had no idea. I had no idea that you could do this. You can actually get rid of a centralized team and get rid of the roadblock. It's like, yeah, it's easy. Okay. You can also automate your security controls so that when something unexpected happens, you are able to recognize it and remediate it. So this is the lifeguard model. Think of a lifeguard at a pool. The lifeguard is just sitting there, and only when something unusual happens does the lifeguard jump in and save some unusual situation. Both of the last two items that I've gone through illustrate something that I kind of informally call the approval trap. I thought about writing an article on this, but I can't quite get 500 words out of this. But basically, any workflow which relies on a third party to issue approval before proceeding is an example of the approval trap. I don't care if you're talking about making a change to your house and you have to get a permit from the local county or building board, or if you're talking about some of the situations that you've done here. And any of these things yield a classic bottleneck. It doesn't scale, it introduces blocking, delays, and it kills agility. So if you really want to have an agile organization, you have to challenge yourself into thinking about how can I get rid of these things? Anytime that somebody is waiting for somebody else, that's what's happening here. Solution? Always think in terms of, can I achieve the same goal with a guardrail approach versus a roadblock approach? Can I establish preventative controls that keep people from building something or doing something that would be dangerous? Okay. And if I can't, maybe there's a way that I can produce something that will automatically detect when somebody breaks the rules and automatically remediate. Again, so I have a nice guardrail type of environment. So this is automated, it scales, it's agile, and this is going to allow you to get to the transformation that most folks are looking for. Folks, are there any questions on the pitfalls of managing either infrastructure or security through a central team? Hillary, were there any questions that came in?
There was just one that came in. I'm not sure. Let's see. Is it a good assumption that the Microsoft Secure Score Click to Run is a great option for partners who manage clients' Microsoft CSP business?
I'm not familiar with that product, so I don't know. One of my limitations is I teach on the AWS side, so I'm familiar with the Microsoft Azure cloud, but I don't know enough of that product to know. If you email me later, I can try to answer that question. Maybe Hillary, you could chat my email over to them in case they lost it, because if I don't know, I'll find somebody else who does. Was that it, Hillary? That was the only one?
Yes, that was the only one that came in so far.
Okay, all right. So 2 more here. Relying on existing manual processes. Sometimes it's inevitable that an organization, before they go to the cloud, they have certain processes that they have developed over time and they just keep them. And a lot of times they're manual. For example, the way we do a production deployment is done manually by a trusted administrator. Well, we got to get rid of that one. Maybe the way we set up new environments has to be done manually by an administrator. If there's a bug in the code, developers have to figure out what the problem is by reading through the logs. Well, that's a manual process to read through logs. When we set up something and we're trying to discover if we have introduced any security flaws, we'll hire an external security auditor to come in and take a look at everything that we're doing and tell us how we did. And that audit will take 2 or 3 weeks, and they'll give us a report, and we won't know if we are running insecure until after we get that report. And if we do have a security breach of some type, we will do a post-mortem and we'll manually take a look at what happened to try to figure out what happened. The key word with all of this is these are all manual processes. Now, you probably know exactly what I'm going to say on the next slide. I'm going to say something about how manual processes introduce a bunch of errors and that we should do automated processes instead. I don't even need to show you the next slide, but let's go ahead and do it. So we need to realize that cloud platforms are all API based. Whether you're doing Azure or Google or anybody else, everything is an API call. That means everything is programmable. And anytime that you have a manual process, it will introduce inconsistency. It is inevitable. And manual processes don't scale. And I've already told you that cross-team dependencies kill agility. So we already know that. And you probably also know instead what some of the solutions are. We should embrace automation. Okay, what type of automation can we embrace here? One is the concept of infrastructure as code. This is a concept that all of the cloud environments support. Infrastructure as code, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is basically the way that you can write some code or some template to kind of describe what it is that you're building. And then you basically feed it to the cloud environment and it builds it for you in a nice, consistent way. And the template that you're building can be checked into source control. It can be managed just like source code because it is. Okay. You can also utilize continuous integration and continuous delivery to basically try to automate our builds and tests and infrastructure provisioning and deployment. If it comes to system configuration, the old way is administrator does an SSH connection into some VM someplace and manually changes some things. So we don't have to do that anymore. We've got Chef and Puppet and SaltStack and Ansible. Probably of most of the folks who come through my class, I'd say Ansible is probably the one that's most widely used. Another alternative to the automated system configuration is an approach that's becoming more common in the cloud era, which is immutable infrastructure. So if I have an EC2 instance, let's say in AWS, and I want to reconfigure it or I want to patch the operating system or something like that, I don't. Instead, I throw it out and I create a replacement. In fact, that's one of the things they do. That's something that Netflix did a while back. Is like you're not allowed to run something in the production environment more than 30 days. If you're not more than 30 days, you have to delete it and recreate it with the latest AMI, latest operating system, latest patches. So there is no system configuration. Everything is disposable. Okay. Another buzzword that is new in the IT industry is this concept of observability. So observability is basically collecting actionable intelligence on our application when it's running. This is collecting logs. This is collecting metrics. This is collecting traces. This is collecting any actionable information that I can. I will want to run this through some type of automated log analysis so that I should be able to easily say let's say it's a web application. What are the top 5 slowest parts of the web application? What are the top 5 most occurring errors that I encounter? And we should also have automated metric collections and alarms. So if things exceed our thresholds, we should at minimum know about it through an email, but in the spirit of automation and remediation, we should also have an automated way to correct the problem, which is typically a little bit more difficult to imagine. Okay. So number 6. Let's keep our organizational structure exactly the way that it is. Now, remember the title of this presentation is How to Fail at Cloud Transformation. And remember the first principle I told you, we're not just doing this for a technical exercise. We're not just going to AWS or Microsoft or whatever as a technical means to an end. We're trying to drive process transformation and organizational transformation so that we can get product and service transformation. Well, you can't get organizational transformation if you have committed to keeping your organization exactly the way it is. You just can't, okay? Now, one thing we used to see a lot more, but thankfully people have gotten away from this, is the way folks would organize teams, they would organize teams by technical discipline. So you'd have your database administrators in one team, you'd have your network administrators in one team, your security analysts in one team. And this leads to something that we've already seen: a centralized security team, a centralized infrastructure team, a centralized network team. And we've seen what happens is we have to send a request to those folks and we have to wait till they do it. And we're waiting in their manual processes. Okay. Now, there is consequence to an organizational structure. Any organizational structure will lead to certain organizational results. And there's no good or bad organizational structures. It's just a matter of what result will you achieve. So cross-team communications kill agility, you know that. Guardrails keep teams safe. But teams that are aligned around a business outcome achieve the business outcome. When you align teams around a technical discipline, you get excellence in that technical discipline. If I have a group of database administrators who just focus on administering Oracle databases, they become experts at it. And the database administration will be the best in class. But we might not achieve our business objective. On the other hand, if we organize a team around achieving a business outcome, we might not have the best database administration or network efficiency or whatever it is that we're measuring. But if we're rewarding people towards a business outcome, you're going to get striving to that business outcome. Okay, it's just an inevitable consequence of the way you structure anything. So nowadays, what we see more, and this is a good idea, is aligning teams around ownership of some business outcome. This leads to cross-skill teams where you have a mixture of skills on any given team. This is also something that Agilists kind of preach. And this is also leading to the concept of DevOps. Now, when a lot of people think of DevOps, they think of, oh, this is an automation pipeline to build and test and deploy stuff into production. That's a little bit more than that. It is the coming together of multiple disciplines in either a common team or a common camaraderie of some form or fashion so that we achieve whatever our common goal is. Okay? Breaking down the barriers. All right. So those are the last two. Rely on existing manual processes and keeping the organizational structure unchanged. Those are good ways to fail. Hillary, did you see any messages come in?
No questions.
Okay, everybody's quiet today. That's fine. All right, that's good. All right, a couple more to think about. If we're going to keep the organizational structure the same, why don't we keep the processes the same? Why should we change the way we do budgeting and financial management? Why should we change what the program management office is doing? Why do we change the way we deploy to production? This last one, this is a great story I got to tell you about. I know of a company before they went to cloud. This is a company, if I mention the name, everybody has heard of this company. They are one of the top destinations on the internet. They had a state-of-the-art production environment, and they had a fixed number, 5, of what they called production lookalike environments. They were built with the same hardware and capacity in configuration as the production environments. The reason they had 5 is they wanted all the teams to test their software out in these test environments and make sure that there were absolutely no snafus before they went into the production environment. Now, this was a while back. This is like 10 years ago or something like that. Now, why did they choose 5? The reason they chose 5 is because they have multiple teams. They had 20 or 30 different teams that needed to use these environments. But the problem is, they didn't necessarily have 5 teams that needed to use these environments, just 5 teams that needed to use these environments. Sometimes they had 8 teams that needed the environment. Sometimes they had 2, okay? And because of the way they did things, the usage of the environments had to be mutually exclusive, okay? So what happened is, and you had to reserve, the project managers had to reserve the usage of these environments for a week at a time. So what would happen on the week when 8 teams needed to go to production, but there's only 5, you would have fighting, okay? Now, I don't mean physical fighting or anything like that, but you would have These project managers are compensated for getting projects done on time and on budget. And if they can't get into that test environment right now, the project is off, okay? And that affects their compensation. So they fight with the other project managers who are rewarded the same way. It's a zero-sum game, okay? And the fights would get ugly and they would get escalated up the org chart. And sometimes the CTO would have to decide which project should go first, okay? So to solve the problem, they came up with a grand process. It was almost like a piece of Westphalia, where they got all the warring parties together and they came up with a peace treaty that basically would bring peace to the land. And whenever we have conflicts like this, we're going to have a nice orderly way to resolve it. And that was great. It solved so many problems and they got used to working that way. And we didn't have wars anymore. Okay. Sounded like a great idea. Wonder what happens when you go to the cloud. Couple things happen when we go to the cloud. The consumption model is completely different in the cloud environment. We have an on-demand environment. We can create resources anytime that we want, and we can dispose of them on demand. This company that I'm talking about, when they went to the cloud, they took their cherished process with them. And guess what? When it came time to create production test environments, they created 5 test environments. Why did you create 5 test environments? You can create an unlimited number of environments whenever you need them and get rid of them whenever you need them. But the reason they created 5 is because they were used to that, and their whole Peace of Westphalia peace treaty that they had, this process that they had developed, basically was embedded on the idea that we have this fixed number of environments. So what I'm saying is get rid of it. You don't need that process anymore. That whole process was based on the idea of limited resources. Now you're in an environment where you have unlimited resources and disposable resources. The cloud is inherently flexible. Okay, so embrace the on-demand nature of the cloud. You don't need to bring this fixed asset thinking with you, and you can also embrace automation. Create the environment when you need it, delete it when you're done with it. And ironically, it reduces your spend. It increases your agility and speed and reduces your spend. Okay. This next one will go really quick. I had one student once, and when they announced what they were working on, they said, yeah, we have a new CTO. This person has a lot of energy and they want us to adopt all of these things. And does anybody want to take a guess? You know, can anybody guess what happens when you try to instantly transform an organization with all of these things all at the same time? Okay, there's a couple immutable truths about, reality that we have to understand. First of all, we like to think that we are flexible and dynamic people, but we're not. We're not. People hate change. People hate change. There's different tolerances for change, but basically people don't like their whole lives upended. We just don't like it. But we are good at small incremental improvements and progressive adaptation. We're actually, as a species, we're kind of adapted to that. So instead of trying to transform overnight, just plan on a slow, steady progression to the cloud. Okay, so the last 2, keeping the business processes unchanged and trying to instantly transform the organization. Hillary, were there any comments on those?
There was one that came in. So how do you map the on-premise mindset, unchanged, versus cloud mindset with agility and innovation?
How do you map it?
Yes, how do you map the on-premise mindset, unchanged, versus cloud mindset with agility and innovation?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it maps. I think it's something where we have to stop thinking one way and start thinking another way. And that's always the challenge, is changing your thinking, because people hate change. And one thing that's very, very difficult to do, especially once you're past the age of 23, I think, is actually changing your mind about something. It's very, very difficult to do. So I'm not sure that I have a a lot of good advice about how to do that, other than we just need to realize the truth that we're in a very, very different environment with very, very different constraints that are different from what we're used to. And when we realize that the underlying nature of reality is different, then we can say, okay, well, some of the cherished things that I'm used to doing don't really apply anymore because they were made for a different world. They were made for a different set of constraints, so they don't apply. But this is very, very difficult to do. I'm not going to lie. It's very, very difficult. I mean, try changing your mind about anything, any deeply held belief that you have, or anything that you're used to. It could be something simple like the way you drive to work in the morning. It's very, very difficult to do that. I'm not sure I answered the question, but that's the best I can do on that. If you send me an email, I can try to elaborate on that a little bit more. Okay. Couple of last things here. This is the last one. I tried to get 10 ways to fail at cloud transformation, but I could only think of 9. So this one was quit. So this one actually didn't come from a student. This actually came from a cocktail party. So back around the holidays, I'm at a holiday party and I don't know many of the people at the party, and I'm kind of standing against the wall with, you know, a cocktail in one hand, and I strike up a conversation with the person next to me, and I said, "What do you do?" It says, "Oh, I'm an IT manager. I do, you know, I'm managing a software development team at X company. What do you do?" It's like, "Oh, I do IT training." He says, "Oh, what kind of IT training?" He said, "Well, mainly I do Amazon Web Services training lately." He was like, "Oh, we tried to use Amazon Web Services and we hated it. It was way more expensive than we thought. And it was a lot harder than we thought. And when we put everything out there, it was like, wait a minute, what keeps the data? What keeps the data safe? It just didn't make sense for us. And so we went back to what we were doing before." And it was a holiday party. I didn't feel like debating with the guy, but I kind of felt sorry. It's like you gave up. You didn't understand that simply running a WordPress, you know, application or something in the cloud is very, very easy. It's the organizational transformation that's difficult, and you ran into the hard parts. Okay, and you didn't really understand that it takes time to develop the expertise. In time, you could have learned how to drive those costs down that you were so concerned about. So a better method is to just set your expectations, communicate your goals, and be patient. Your first effort might not be a glowing success. In fact, it might be a big failure, and that's okay. It's okay to fail, as I'm going to show you in just a minute. Okay, now, as I've gone through this presentation, you may have seen that some of the things that I've gone through have really struck a chord with what you experienced. So others of you may have found as like, you know, the difficulties that we have, they don't really, some of them kind of do, but they're a little bit different from what you described, Ken. So do you have any advice for things that we can take back to our organization for how to detect if we're having if we're heading towards a failure? Yes, I do. Here's the things that you look for. Look around and look for manual processes. Anytime that you see people manually setting up something, or manually loading a database, or manually checking test results, or manually checking the production, anytime you see that, manual processes don't scale and they introduce inconsistency. Waiting, anytime that you see one team or one person waiting for another group to get back to them, waiting kills agility. Fixed asset thinking. The cloud is inherently flexible. Anytime that you see people thinking, well, there's only one environment and one team can use it at a time. No, there's an infinite number of environments. And a lack of transparency. Sometimes when you ask people, why are you following this process? And they say, well, we've always followed this process. Okay, well, why? What is the purpose of that process? If you can't explain what the purpose of a process is, or why the organization is organized a certain way, then maybe that process or maybe that part of the organization is something that can change. Last thing I wanted to do, I want to leave you on a positive note here. Failure is not the end of the world. So I got a few quotes for you. Secret of life is to fall 7 times and to get up 8 times. And ancient Chinese proverb from probably 1,000 years ago. You can always count on a good ancient Chinese proverb to kind of succinctly put it. Failure is not falling down, it's refusing to get up. The person I met at the cocktail party, that was the person who failed because they refused to get back on that horse and give it another try. Okay? All right, so don't feel bad about failure. It's an opportunity. So before I open it up for questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Hillary briefly because Hillary wants to tell you about some promotions that you're running. So Hillary?
Yes, so we did want to make you guys all aware of our summer promotion. So now until August 29, please use promo code SUMMER500 before to receive up to $500 off public training or $500 off per day for private training. So to learn more about our summer promotion and to explore some training courses for you all, please visit the link in the chat that I'll be posting soon.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm just looking through the attendee list to see if I recognize anybody. I don't know that I do. Okay, were there any questions that I could answer? And by the way, if I can't answer, then feel free to email me later and I'll try to do a better job putting my thoughts into words. Hillary, did you see any other questions in the chat?
Yes, so as far as whether you'll get the session recording, you'll be getting the session recording at the end of the week. However, we won't be sharing the session slides. Let's see. Okay, so we have another question that came in by Dave Bush. So what is a good approach to understanding the big picture and then making the specific changes?
Understand the big picture. I think that's definitely something that takes a lot of art. It's more art than science. I also think that, and this kind of dovetails into what we do at ExitCertified, is just a lot of good basic training in the fundamentals of the different cloud environments. Working with Kubernetes, working with DevOps, working with all these different technologies, Docker containers. I think when you have enough of the in order to have the same high level vision, we have to have the kind of the similar low level understanding of the basics of the technology. And so I think if you get into a situation where you have 100 people in your IT organization and 50, 60, 70 of them have gone through enough training so that they understand the nature of how the cloud is different, how everything is on demand, that you can automate everything. And then when you come out as a leader and you try to articulate a vision of where we want to go as an organization, your words are easy to be accepted because they mesh with what we've heard when we went to training class. Other than that, the only way to articulate a vision in general is, I'll take you back to the example that I gave you earlier about that two-step project plan that one team did. It was just so elegant. So the simpler an illustration, the simpler a plan, the simpler the picture, it's just something that people can understand. We're doing this now, we're not doing this now. We're moving this application, we're not doing this application. We're addressing this concern, we're not addressing this concern. We're moving in this direction, we're not going in this direction. Anything that you can do to simplify that articulation, I think is the best thing. I'm not sure, David, if I answered your question or not. If you send me an email, I can try better. Was there any other question?
That's all I see so far.
Okay. Okay, well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any other further questions, I'll be here for a little bit longer, and I'll try to answer your questions as best I can. If not, you're free to send me an email. I'll just go ahead and put my email back in here again. At techdata.com. And if you have any questions, not just about the technology, but about the training classes that we offer and things like that, I'll make sure that question gets to the right people. Okay. So thank you very much, and hope you have a good remainder of your day.
Right. Have a great afternoon, everyone. The recording will be sent to you all by the end of the week. So thank you so much for joining. Have a great afternoon.
All right, take care.